Hello, everyone, and good morning, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Maybe you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining us today is another author of the February lineup making their official debut here on the channel. Now, my guest today is an historical fiction writer, and she is in the university studying criminology and is en route to receiving a commission as an officer in the United States Air Forces. She plans to write on the side until she has retired from the U.S. Air Force. And while she writes mainly historical and alternative historical fiction, she also has several dystopian and apocalyptic books she plans to write. And in this interview, viewers and listeners, we're going to be talking about our guest's upcoming release, which is today, which is a new take on James Fenimore Cooper's Last of the Mohicans, which I am so excited to explore. So, without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to our guest today, Johannah Jahn. Johannah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome, Johannah. I am so excited to have you here, and congratulations on the release of your book. That is incredible. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. So before we dive into the behind the scenes and your journey as an author, let's start with a little icebreaker question. Is there a little known fact that not a lot of people may know about you?
Well, my family's German. Both of my grandparents on my father's side were from Germany, and they grew up there in the 20s and 30s. And I was able to actually visit some of the towns that they were from when I was in Germany a couple years ago, which was really cool.
Awesome. That's amazing. That is absolutely incredible. And without giving away too much of your book, Johannah, what can you tell us about your newest release?
So, as you mentioned, it's an adaptation from The Last of the Mohicans. It's following two sisters who are going to meet up with their father, who's the commander of a fort, took place during the French and Indian War. And it really tries to put a scope on the relations between the British, French, and then some of the Native American tribes that were in that area at the time.
Nice. Very, very nice. So now let's dive right into your journey as an author. So let's start at the very beginning. So in your bio that you sent to me, you love to write historical fiction and alternative history with a little bit of dystopian and apocalyptic books on the side. How did that love for the written word come about? What was your aha moment?
Yeah, so it was definitely just reading Last of the Mohicans. I've kind of been obsessed with it for my entire life. Funnily enough, my father showed me the BBC production from the 70s when I was about 5 or 6. And then I read a younger version of it when I was in middle school. And then eventually in high school, I read the actual book by James Fenimore Cooper. And I was so in love with the story, but I wanted to give it a different spin. And that's what actually got me into writing. And then I eventually decided to pursue other projects as well.
Nice. Very, very nice. And there is a question which I am very curious to ask you because I've always been fascinated by this. Now, since this book is an adaptation of a book that already exists, James Fenimore Cooper's Last of the Mohicans, how is your adaptation and interpretation different from Cooper's, but still familiar? And as we'll touch on later, what has been the business side and the legal side, and lack of better terms, to make sure that your work is not infringing on the copyright of Last Mohicans?
Sure. So Last of the Mohicans, the book, was copyrighted in 1826 and is in the public domain. So as far as anything that I'm taking from the original book, it's all completely legal. If there's anything that's unique to any of the film adaptations or any other book adaptations, which, like I said, I've only really read that kids kind of version of it. If there's anything unique to those stories, that can't be present in my book. So I had to make sure that I was making everything from the source material or from my own original work. As far as what I'm planning, like what I did with it, I think that James Fenimore Cooper does a really good job of setting up a plot and doing really good like plot points and like storyline. But I didn't think he had the greatest character development, so I really focused on giving my characters more development, and especially within their relationships with each other, I wanted to make them feel more realistic. And I tried to put a little bit more emphasis on exploring and showing the culture of the Native American characters in the show, in the book, excuse me.
Nice. Very, very nice. So now I'd like to talk about the behind the scenes of the book itself. So since it is based on Fenimore Cooper's novel, but your own spin and adaptation, as well as highlighting issues and cultures that may not have been explored in the original novel, how did you create the outline for your book? And did you have a ritual or routine that worked best for you when developing it?
Yeah, so as far as outlining, I had like the bare bones outline that I like the plot points from the original story that I wanted to 100% keep. And then I kind of just tried to figure out how I was going to make it to each of those plot points. I tried to keep a lot of the scenes that I really, really loved from the original pretty similar, just because that's part of the story and what made it so good in the first place. But there's a couple of plot lines that have been removed. There's a couple of plot lines that have been added, and I've added probably 7 or 8 new characters as well to give more to the story. As far as the outlining process, like with those scenes, I had like a physical copy of Last of the Mohicans. I had like a million different tabs in it, so I could go through and reread every scene to see like what was like really good, what I really liked about it, what I wanted to change, and then any of the other like dialogue that I thought was like really good or what was like maybe not the best.
Okay. Fascinating. And as a little fan question, which will be plenty throughout the interview, Johanna, what was sort of the inspiration behind the title itself?
Yeah, so that was a really hard part of the story because I feel like James Fenimore Cooper named it so perfectly, but I wanted to make the book distinguishable from the original. So I kind of just tried to like play around with like a subtitle. The focus of my story is more like Uncas centric as opposed to Hawkeye centric like the original was. So making it the Mohicans being like the main title with them being the focus, that's why I chose to do that. And then Last of Their Tribe was to allude to the fact that both of them, regardless of whichever of them dies first, they will both be the last in their tribe.
Nice. And that's actually really, really cool. And honestly, it actually reminds me of what was it? I think it was like a French Canadian animated TV show kids production of Last Mohicans, which actually featured Uncas as the main character. Yes, you had Chingachgook and Hawkeye, but it was really Uncas who was the main character, which honestly, that itself was very, very fascinating. And it actually expanded upon the book, which when I first saw it, okay, there's going to be an adaptation of the film. But for people who don't know, a little tangent here, the film only covers just the, what's the word? The main storyline. The book is actually much longer with a lot of other characters, a lot of other side quests, so to speak, and more character development throughout the story with the core list of characters. And when writing the story itself, Johanna, would you consider yourself to be an outliner or a pantser?
I'm 1,000% outliner. It kind of makes me anxious to not kind of know where stuff is going. My outlines are very, very descriptive. I start with kind of just like the basic plot points, and then I go like scene by scene, and then I go like not line by line, but like pretty much paragraph by paragraph in my outline before I ever actually start writing. So
Yes, absolutely same. I'm completely the same way. I like having an outline. I tried pantsing, doesn't work for me. I get too overwhelmed. It does not work at all. So yeah, I'm 100% in agreement with you. And ultimately, as you were writing the first draft of your book, this is a two-part question. What was the goal you had for yourself as the author going into this project as your very first novel? And secondly, what was the promise you're making, not just to yourself, but also readers of historical fiction and possibly readers and enjoyers of the original Last Mohicans?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So as far as for myself, this has been kind of like a passion project I've wanted to do for my almost my entire life. So I kind of just wanted to make it the exactly kind of like the story that I always like wish I could have seen, because I felt like none of the film adaptations ever really like did a good job of like showing the original story without also including some of the issues in the like original that I wasn't super comfortable with. So I wanted to create that same like awesome plot that James Fenimore Cooper came up with, while also kind of straying away from some of the like more cultural insensitivities and some of the more unrealistic parts from the original novel, like the bear cloak scene. I thought that was kind of it was very funny, but not super realistic. So
Absolutely, very true. And now, kind of going a little bit more on the research side. So, as you mentioned earlier, you really wanted to highlight and really showcase the various indigenous cultures of the Americas during this time, as well as how were the French handling the war during this point in the 18th century, as well as the British. So, when doing the research and drafting these characters, how did you maintain their authenticity to where they're not caricatures of their former selves, but in truth, the most accurate depiction of what these characters should be like in this period of history?
yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest thing in that is just to give the characters a lot of depth. Like James Fenimore Cooper had an issue where he kind of played with those like stereotypes of like the like bad Native American or the good Native American, and that's like a really harmful stereotype. So in that, I was trying to show that these characters have like depth, like they're not morally like dark or morally like light. They have flaws in like both ways, but they're also can not just be like a totally evil character. And that is especially true with the antagonist of Magua. Like I wanted to make sure that it was clear that he was like driven from this like point of revenge, and not just because he's like a bad like character, which I honestly think that in that way James Fenimore Cooper did do a okay job with him in the original. Like he did give him a motive. I didn't think that it was necessarily as valid to do the things that he was actually doing to the characters in the story, but I did try and mess with that a little bit to make it a little bit more realistic. And then also just doing like as much research as possible to try and make the characters as accurate to their particular tribe, and also like for that particular region, since it takes place in the Northeast.
Absolutely. And I think when we look about a little bit of American history at this point, not a lot of people take into consideration that the French and Indian War was the staging ground for what would be the American Revolution. I mean, you had everyone participating in this war. And in Europe, it's called the 7 Years' War because it was, 7 years. But here in the States, it's the French and Indian War. And now people take into consideration that the British were losing very, very bad. The French and their native allies were actually winning in the northeastern states. And just that history alone is just very fascinating to me. And I cannot wait to read it, Joanna, because I have been dying to read some good historical fiction from that time period. So I cannot wait to see how you brought this period of history to life and gave it, your own spin to it. And with that in mind, when you were about to publish it, what was the reaction like from friends and family who learned that you were working on this? At what point did you tell them that this is going to be a reality?
Yeah, so I finished actually like writing my manuscript around a year ago, and it's been just a very long process of like getting it ready for publication with like the cover and just like final edits and stuff like that. So they've all known for, well, my family has known since I started writing it because I always intended
Nice.
on publishing it, but I didn't start talking about it to kind of my friends and then the people that I'm around within like school and work until around 7 or 8 months ago. Until I like knew I was like, it's going to be ready for publication.
Sweet. Very, very nice. Now, kind of on a more reflective and a little serious question before we go into that segment of the interview. As of course, with all authors, we always find ourselves at the mercy of these two big, what's the word I'm thinking of? Hindrances in the creative process. And that is, of course, the writer's block and imposter syndrome. Writer's block is always going to be there and going to stump us and, prevent us from writing or make us reconsider writing at all. And imposter syndrome is very, very detrimental because it makes us, doubt our abilities to tell impactful storytelling, especially if it is our first works. And I'm sure you definitely agree that at probably a certain point in your journey as an author, there were probably moments where, like, are people going to enjoy this? Are they going to give it, time of day to like read it and, give reviews, feedback? All of that is just placed upon our shoulders, and it's a lot. It's a lot to deal with. So for you, Johannah, as an author and as a creative person, how do you handle these two together or possibly separately?
Yeah, so I would say for writer's block, it wasn't really something I struggled with a ton for my current debut because I was just like, I did it so fast. I didn't even like, I wrote the original draft so fast, like it was within like a 2 month period. So I didn't really like have time to be experiencing that writer's block. And so when I first started like on my second draft and it hit me for the
Mhm.
first time, it was pretty difficult. And I just tried to get over that hump by, reading the original, and I like watched some of the scenes from the movie, from the BBC production, and from the Mondo World 26 episode cartoon that was
Yep,
created.
that's the one.
I love that cartoon. It's so good. So I would watch scenes from those to just like inspire me, and it really helped push me through. So I am trying to figure out going forward when I'm writing books that aren't adaptations, if I can find works that have similar vibes to them to try and like watch that to give me inspiration to keep going. As far as imposter syndrome, I've definitely had a ton of it with my adaptation because like it's a story that's already been written. It's a classic. Everybody loves it. So it's really hard. Like, is anyone
Mhm.
actually going to appreciate mine? Or are they just going to be like, wow, this is just a really terrible, like, rip off of like the original? Like, I really hope people don't perceive it that way and that they actually enjoy it because I did spend so much time trying to make it a good story, but also make it different from the original. And I've honestly still been struggling with that. So I
Mm.
think I'm probably not the best person to answer how to get over the imposter syndrome at the moment, but I'm working on it.
That's fair. That's completely fair. Now, before we get into the reflective portion of the interview, Joanna, there was another fan question I want to ask. And this may border on spoilers, so you can be as detailed on your answers as you want. But for this question, I got to ask, as the author, what was probably your favorite scene to write, as well as the most difficult scene to write?
That's a great question. So this is kind of an odd question to answer because my favorite scene to write wasn't in the original, but it is like a historical thing that actually happened during the siege of Fort William Henry.
Ooh.
I included the part in actual history where some of the native allies of the French got into the fort before they left after it had been surrendered and basically massacred everyone
Yes.
in the infirmary. And so writing that scene was really cool because one, it was completely original. Like there was nothing to base it off of from the book. It was just from history. And I also got to research kind of a lot of the tribes that were with the French during that particular siege, as opposed to just like generally allied with the French.
Yes.
And I got to basically create just several completely original characters who I got to work with for that scene. So that was a really fun scene to write. As far as the most difficult scene to write, I would probably say the scene where they're at in the cave at Glen Falls, particularly because it was such a long scene and there's just so much dialogue, and I wanted to make sure that the relationships between the characters were developing well, because this is a big scene for the characters developing their relationships with each other, especially between the romantic interests. So
yes,
that scene was incredibly difficult, but it was also very fun to write as well.
Very true, very true. And for anyone that has seen any versions of Last of the Mohicans, you know the scene that we are talking about. That scene in particular really amplifies the not only the tension, but also the romance, the underlying romance that has reached a boiling point for the characters involved. So I can imagine writing that scene was probably a little bit intimidating because, you know, it's such a very memorable scene in the book and, of course, the film adaptations. So you want to give it justice and due diligence. And now going back to our previous question of, you know, imposter syndrome, that actually goes into this next big question, which, fair warning, it's a very loaded question. It's a very, very thought provoking one. And that is, of course, Joanna, what does it mean to be an author in the digital age? Because the industry has changed so much. I mean, indie authors are on the rise, trad authors are still popular more than ever, and hybrid authors are now creeping in. But regardless of what publishing direction you go, everyone agrees that it's never been more easier to get published, but it's never more difficult to market ourselves because we are not marketers. We are not business people. We don't know what's trendy. We don't know what's going to get people's attention. It's a lot. It is a lot. And especially with social media, which is a double-edged sword. It is a wonderful tool for authors to use to reach out, connect, build a team. I'm sure you've used social media to help build your own team for editors, possibly some artists, maybe some beta readers and ARC readers on the side. But like anything on social media, we leave ourselves exposed, and it could be a lot. It could be emotionally and socially draining. And I honestly believe, and I think you'll agree, that social media heightens our imposter syndrome tenfold. So for you, Joanna, as a debut author, with all that said, what has still disciplined you to stick to your guns and not compromise your position as an author or the stories that you want to tell and share?
Yeah, so I think that because I'm getting into writing specifically for this passion project, I've never really considered taking advantage of like this social media age and like writing books and producing books that I can just like sell for like basically no work on my own other than just like the writing portion. Especially with this debut, I was like very intentional. I wanted it to be like a good piece of art because like I'm so passionate about it. And I don't have a ton of interest in writing books that I'm not incredibly passionate about. And I think that it's really important that we're able to use the social media and other digital marketing as like the great tool it is, and not to just spread a bunch of like, I don't want to say mindless books because I don't think there's necessarily such a thing as a mindless book unless it's written by AI. But I think it's important that like books have a lot of meaning behind them, especially meaning to the author, even if they're not necessarily the most like sellable book, if that makes sense.
Right. Very true. That is absolutely very, very true. And this actually goes into another question, which actually tags on your point of AI books, because definitely in the last few years, another thing that has changed in the industry is, AI. And AI has always been advancing and always been evolving in technology. It's never going to change. But what I think a lot of people are having an issue with are people using generative AI to create stuff, whether that's um, artwork, books, covers, and now even more, you have artificial narration on books as well. I found that out when working on a project recently that, oh, that was a new feature. It's like, I never asked for it, and it doesn't really have the same, feel. I get it. I can see how some people might use it, but for me, I wouldn't use a feature like that. And what I find very fascinating is that a lot of the authors that I featured, especially last year, all of us began our careers during the COVID years. A lot of us got into writing because it was a way to escape the boredom. And maybe you have some thoughts on this, that because of the COVID years and lockdown years, it became a breeding ground for new authors and new talent. And the floodgates were soon taken by this tidal wave of new authors, whether you're hybrid, indie, trad. And it's amazing. And some people have argued that we are in a golden age of authors. But some have also argued on the other side that we are also leaning towards a cyber dark age with the rise of generative AI, because it makes a false sense of creativity by mass producing these books that lack the human aspect, the human voice, so to speak. So ultimately, Joanna, my question to you is this. In your own opinion, do you believe that we are in this golden age of authors, or we are slowly tilting our way to a generative AI dark age in terms of a lack of creativity and possibly a farewell to what it is to be creative?
That's a really good question. I think it's probably more of the latter, unfortunately.
Mm,
And I not that I think that we're gonna ever get to a part where we're gonna be like completely in this dark age of like generative AI and books that have no creativity or passion in them, because I think that there will always be people who love writing enough that even if they're like shut out from social media and can't really even market, like they'll still write. So I think that we'll always have that human aspect. Like we've always had the desire to write stories for the last like 1,000+ years. So I know that will not go away, but unfortunately, I think that even now, like social media has just been flooded with these books that either just like aren't like they're like written with AI, written by AI, or have just been like pumped out like a fast fashion book in a way. And that's really hard to watch as someone who has loved reading and loves writing like my entire life practically.
hmm
It's really hard to see that like almost destruction of creativity. And I don't think it's going anywhere good at the moment, but I do have faith that there will always be creatives out there who will push actual creative, passionate work, regardless of what's happening with AI and the internet. So
hmm
I think I'm a little bit optimistic that some people will hold out in that way.
Absolutely. Very true. Very, very true. And now we go into probably my favorite segment, the business side of being an author. So let's start with a little icebreaker question, Joanna. So, as you were writing and developing this book, as you mentioned earlier, you did a lot of research. You used Last Mohicans as a template and basis to kind of stay true to the original story, but you didn't want to just be, Last Mohicans rebranded. You wanted to be your own take, your own adaptation of the story, and if not, possibly a heightened version with, more updated history, more research, more depth to the characters, and so forth. And since it is released today, leading up to that, in terms of promoting and marketing your book, what really surprised you about that part of the author's journey? And is there anything you would have done differently in terms of that?
Definitely. I think my biggest thing was that I didn't have a good grasp on who my target audience was until
Mm,
like very late in the process. I'm a 21-year-old college student. So in my head, I was also writing for 21-year-old college students, but in reality, that's probably not the case. I think that my audience is probably older and probably more on the male side, whereas I'm a woman. So I think if I had known like better what my audience was going to be, I could have like targeted any like promotions and ads in a better direction. Whereas I kind of promoted them towards myself, like not myself, but like people who fit kind of the same demographic as me. And that was a pretty big mistake as far as trying to grow a platform from like nothing, because this is my debut.
absolutely, very, very true. And on that notion of audiences, it is a
I can't hear you. Uh,
oh no, can you not hear me? So thank you, Joanna, for that really great insight on, understanding one's audience and kind of going more into that. It is a 50-50 split because understanding the audience is not easy, especially when you're trying to figure out, okay, I've written a book that's in this genre, but who exactly is going to read it? And one thing that I've learned from other authors doing this show is that when we reach that point, we find ourselves in another equilibrium balance, and that is understanding the genre that we are writing in and also maintaining our own authenticity. Because on one hand, you have readers who are expecting a certain thing from each genre. And especially if you're adapting another book, people are going to expect the book to go beat for beat the original. And on the other side is maintaining our own authenticity. We're not trying to be like anybody else. We're not trying to be like Bernard Cornwell, James Fenimore Cooper, anyone else. We're not trying to copy them or trying to be them. They have played major roles in our writing, that is for sure. But we want people, when they pick up and read our books, to hear our voice, not anyone else's. And that's not an easy thing to do. So for you, Joanna, how did you develop your writing style so that way it would highlight your voice as the author?
Yeah, so especially with this book in particular, it was really interesting to kind of find my voice because I did try to, I don't want to say mimic James Fenimore Cooper style, because I definitely didn't want it to sound like it was written 200 years ago. But I did I liked the way he, like, everything sounded just a little bit more formal, and obviously with dialogue, that's going to be the case since it takes place to around 280 years ago, or 270 years ago. But I really tried to like find kind of what worked for me, and I found like I had a lot of crutch words that were like I had never noticed them before until I had people read it, and then they were like, "You use these words a lot."
Mm,
And so I was like, okay, so clearly I have a like preference for this certain style. And so I tried to merge the way that I was like naturally wanting to write with kind of the same, style is probably not the right word, but the same kind of style as James Fenimore Cooper and his original story, to kind of make it a blend of mine and his, since it is an adaptation of his work.
absolutely. Very, very true. And probably another important question that I want to ask you, and I asked another historical fiction writer on the show earlier this year, is for historical fiction writers, there is this hesitancy of not only are people going to take our writing seriously, but are people going to take us seriously as researchers? Because I definitely feel as historical fiction writers, you do have to have some level of research to really highlight that, I've done the research, I know what I'm talking about. And that again goes back to the imposter syndrome of, are people going to take me seriously? Now, there is sort of like this, what's the word I'm thinking of? This split between historical fiction writers who have backgrounds in history, who are trained to study the sources and so forth. But then you have the other side for those who are passionate about history, may not study it in terms of building a career on it, but they are passionate about reading history, writing history, and learning about history. So for you, Johannah, in that regard, how has it been for you to do the research and to really showcase that you know what you're talking about? Yes, there are a lot of fictitious elements, but you're also bringing to life a period in history that no longer exists.
Yeah, that's like a really good question. So, I am studying criminology, but I am also studying for a minor history, although my emphasis is in more of American military history as opposed to colonial type history.
Nice.
But as far as studying the history that goes along with this story, it has been incredibly difficult because, like I said, a lot of it is knowing like a lot about those cultures of the Native American tribes, and there just isn't that much stuff written about them, and there's almost nothing written about them from their perspective because many of those tribes did not have a written language at the time. So a lot of it is relying off of sources from white historians and European historians in particular. So there is the concern that even if I'm like researching well, that some of the information might just be bias. So it's kind of difficult in that way. I have done an insane amount of research just so that I can know at the very least what was said about like these cultures and these situations and these like events in history. So even if that stuff isn't actually what happened, at least I know as much as I can about what we as like a society know about those situations, if that makes sense.
Very true. Absolutely very true. And that kind of goes into another fan question, which kind of goes back into history, which is, since it is back in our nation's past, what were some of the, or let me rephrase it, since it is set in our nation's past, in terms of the five physical senses, which of the senses was the most difficult to emulate during that time period as you were writing it out?
I would say probably hearing, because I don't think that any of us, at least I've never lived anywhere remote enough to kind of understand what it's like to be somewhere where there's not just constant noise of like cars or like dogs barking, like computers, phones. Like it's really hard to get somewhere where you don't really have any background noise like that. So to like have the like calm of being in this like northern New York, like upstate New York wilderness, you're surrounded by trees, maybe you're in a cave next to a waterfall. I've never experienced that. So a lot of it had to come from reading other sources, like from the original and like how he described it. And he is someone who lived not at the same time as the story of Last Mohicans takes place, but not too long after, only a couple of decades,
Right.
around less than half a century. So I just like, it was really difficult to try and picture what it would actually be like to be in such a serene, calm place. So I think that I would probably say hearing in that regard.
Nice. Okay. All right. And kind of a little bit more a fun fan question. Now, since this is an adaptation, if your book was adapted into a film or TV show, for the main characters, and let's actually boil it down to the romantic leads. For the romantic leads, who would you choose to play those characters?
Oh, that's a really difficult question. I've never I have like pictures of people who I like in the past that I always kind of like fan casted in my head. But they're much older now and probably wouldn't be age accurate. I for a while thought that Martin Sensmeyer would have been like an amazing Uncas back when he was younger, but he is, I think, around 40 now, so he's almost double Uncas's age. And for Cora, I always pictured, I think her name's Adelaide Kane.
Yeah.
She played Mary Queen of Scots in Reign, and I always pictured her playing Cora as far as like when I was much younger in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really thought about it recently, mostly because I just haven't really considered what it would look like to be like a movie or anything like that. And I guess, yeah, those would be my two if I was going to, from back when I was in high school. But
All right. If I also can make a recommendation for Uncas, it would have to be, I hope I'm getting his name correctly, but he's the actor in the remake of Magnificent Seven, Martin.
Martin Sensmeyer, yeah.
Yes, he would be definitely a perfect fit for Uncas because he is around the right age, at least in my opinion. And definitely for Cora, the actress who you selected to play Cora from Reign, that's also a really, really good choice. If I also had to choose, actually, no, that is a really good one. That is really hard. But yeah, definitely that is a really good one. And now, kind of going a little bit more on another reflective fan question. When you finished writing the book, I imagine it was a very momentous occasion because you finally finished a passion project of yours that you have been dying to do for a very, very long time. But I imagine leading up to that, there were probably ideas of expanding upon certain chapters or maybe doing the groundwork for a sequel or potential trilogy. But there may have been some apprehensiveness of, do I want to do that if the book does not at least sell on its own as a standalone? So ultimately, a two-part question. When did you know when to stop writing the book? And when did you make the decision to say the book is done?
That's a great question. So as far as like my original first draft, like I said, I outlined the hell out of that book. Like I knew pretty much everything, scene for scene, almost even like paragraph for paragraph. So I knew when I finished that. As far as when I was done editing and like all of that part of it, it was just like once I had been doing it and I had gone over it so many times that I had probably read through it like 10, 12, 15 times just to like check and see if there was anything else to change. And I was like, I've read this so many times, I could probably read like half of it word for word. And at that point, I was like, I don't think there's anything else I want to change, and it looks good. And that's kind of when I decided. And that was probably around 2.5 months ago. So.
All right. And now we arrive at the final question, Johannah. And this is probably one of my favorite questions to ask. So we talked about a lot in this interview, from your passion for, this book, what you've learned about the industry thus far as an indie author, the struggles you've encountered along the way, and possibly the future struggles that you may face down the road, as well as some of your ideas for who would play these characters, your favorite moments, and so forth. At the end of the day, what do you want people to take away from this book? And ultimately, for other authors, especially debuting authors like yourself, what would be your word of wisdom to your fellow writers?
Yeah, so if we're talking like a takeaway from the book, I think this is just something I've always gotten from James Fenimore Cooper's original, every adaptation, and then from the many times I've read through my own, is just to kind of understand and feel the tragedy of it. Because while the Mohican tribe actually never has died out, though their language has, there have been several tribes that have, and there have been like obviously millions of natives that were killed during the colonization of the Americas. And I think that it is such a tragedy, and I really hope that with reading my story, people can feel that and feel kind of an appreciation for those cultures and respect for the fact that many of them are still around, even though the story is about them being lost. There are tons of Native American tribes and cultures that are still alive today, which is amazing. As far as advice, I would say don't be too hard on yourself if you don't get things right away, because I've gotten so much more understanding just from all of the like screw ups I've made along the way.
Right.
And to know that as long as you are putting forth like a good product out there, and you're writing something that you're passionate about and that you've put a lot of effort into, that you shouldn't let anyone make you feel less than if you're publishing indie. I think that it's really, unfortunately, a lot of people get a lot of flack for publishing indie because it's not as respected, which is really unfortunate, because so many indie authors do so much work and do an incredible job putting this product into the market. And so I would say, as long as you are doing your due diligence and making sure this is a good product, you should not let any of those people make you feel any bit of inferior just because it's indie that you're publishing.
Well spoken, Johanna. Well spoken. And on that note, viewers and listeners, we conclude this amazing author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to Johanna for coming on the show and telling us all about her debuting book, which I will link down below in the description of this video. Now, before we officially end, Johanna, again, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it. Where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and connect? And do you have any shout outs you want to give to people who have helped you on your journey?
Yeah, for sure. So both my Instagram and TikTok are under JM and then Jahn, which is my last name, .writes. So you can find those pretty easily. I also have Facebook, which is just under my full name, Johannah Jahn. Any shout outs? I haven't watched a ton of it in a while because I've been really busy. But when I was, especially in my younger, late high school, early college years, I watched a lot of Jenna Maressi videos because I thought she was really funny. So definitely her videos inspired me to keep going, and especially encouraged me to pursue indie publishing. So
nice. Very, very nice. I will link all those down below in the description of this video. And again, viewers and listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another amazing, incredible author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. If you liked this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date with all new episodes coming out later this week and the rest of the month. And if you'd like to see Johanna come back on the show in a follow-up interview or possibly in a Writer's Hub episode, comment down below. And until next time, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wish you all a wonderful morning wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you all next time. Take care and have a wonderful day.